Why was she still standing in the rain when everyone else had already gone inside? The downpour had turned the Carolina clay into a reddish, sucking mess beneath her boots. The air reeked of wet brass and burnt powder. Four soldiers laughed from beneath the equipment shed canopy. Their rifles leaned neatly against the table, their shoulders dry. Staff Sergeant Tess Ryland, soaked to the bone, stood alone 30 meters away, waiting for orders that weren't coming. No one had told her to stay outside, but no one had told her she could come in either. That was how it usually started, the silence before the insult. She shifted her stance slightly, rain dripping from the brim of her patrol cap, hands behind her back, posture straight. A faint hiss of wind pushed through the pine line beyond the berm, carrying the faint metallic rattle of distant targets. She could smell gun, oil, mud, and the faint bitterness of cordite. It was supposed to be an evaluation day, final marksmanship certification for 4 Ranger candidates before their Joint Special Operations Command screening. She was their senior instructor. She'd been assigned by Fort Trenton's training command itself. But to them, she was just a box ticked for optics, a token face on the range. From under the canopy, one of them muttered something, and the others laughed harder. The kind of laughter that wasn't just about a joke, it was about power. Tess said nothing, because she'd learned a long time ago that silence cuts deeper than words. What none of them realized, though, was that her radio was still on. The frequency was open. 20 miles north, a SEAL team commander was monitoring the same channel. Every word they said was being broadcast. But Tess didn't know that yet. She only knew the rain, and the familiar ache of disappointment settling somewhere deep in her chest. At 29, she had stopped expecting respect to come easy. She adjusted the scope mount on her rifle case just to keep her hands busy. The sound of laughter hit her again, faint through the rain. She ignored it. Instead, she let her eyes drift toward the trees, where the mist hung low and silver. There was something calming about days like this, when the world seemed small, reduced to a rhythm of drops and breath. But behind that calm, a thought gnawed quietly. How many times do I have to prove myself? Tess Ryland wasn't a rookie. She wasn't a recruit who'd stumbled into a job above her skill. She earned every inch of ground she stood on. She'd grown up in eastern Montana, on a cattle ranch where winter lasted 8 months and the nearest hospital sat 60 miles down a dirt road. Her father, former Marine Scout sniper, didn't believe in shortcuts or sympathy. He believed in preparation. He taught her to shoot when she was 7 because on their land, when something went wrong, you didn't call for help. You solved it yourself. By 12, Tess could read wind across an open field, calculate bullet drop by eye, and account for temperature shift before taking a shot. Her father never said she was good. He just handed her longer distances. That was his way of saying she was ready. When he died, she was 17. The day after his funeral, she enlisted. She hadn't done it for glory or patriotism. She'd done it because she didn't know what else to do with everything he'd left her: the precision, the silence, the self-control. At 18, she entered basic training, and the instructors noticed her immediately. Not because she was loud or trying to prove something, but because she never missed. Every qualification, every drill, every timed shot she hit. The range instructors double-checked the scorecards more than once. The sergeants in charge called her steady hands. By 20, she was accepted into the 75th Ranger Regiment. By 22, she'd completed the Special Operations Target Interdiction course at Fort Trenton, the same ground she was now standing on, rain hammering around her. She spent 3 years deployed in Afghanistan and the Ardennes Valley. She learned what it meant to shoot when it mattered, not on a range, not at paper, but at people who wanted her team dead. She remembered one night clearer than all the rest. Sangra Province. Her team was pinned down, a machine gunner on a ridge laying fire so heavy that no one could move. Her spotter had gone silent, hit in the leg. She'd calculated distance and wind by instinct, felt the rifle like it was an extension of her heartbeat. One shot, one kill. The ridge went quiet. The team made it out. She never told anyone about it afterward. Because in her world, the people who mattered already knew. Back at the range, the laughter stopped for a moment and Tess looked up. One of the candidates, Specialist Halbrook, was staring at her. A tall, broad-shouldered kid with too much confidence and not enough restraint. He called out through the rain. "Hey, Sergeant, you sure you're supposed to be out here? Instructor, probably running late." The others chuckled. Tess said quietly, "I am the instructor." Halbrook grinned, "Right sure you are." Another one, Sergeant Mason Torrin, crossed his arms. "Look, ma'am, maybe wait in the truck till the real range officer gets here. We don't want anyone getting cold." The word ma'am wasn't respect, it was dismissal. Tess kept her tone level. "You're on my range, you're under evaluation, you'll shoot when I say." Torrin frowned, "And if we do?" "Then you fail." The silence that followed was short but sharp. Then, predictably, Halbrook smirked. "Prove it, Sergeant. Let's see you hit 1,000 meters before we waste ammo." Rain dripped from her cap. She didn't blink. "Set the targets," she said. They hesitated, exchanging looks. Then, with a few muttered curses, they went. As they walked off, Tess opened the back of the government pickup and lifted out her rifle case. Inside lay the same M2010 she'd carried on deployment, blued steel gleaming under the gray light. Every inch of it was clean, maintained like ritual. She assembled it piece by piece, the stock, the bolt, the suppressor, each motion smooth, automatic. For her, it wasn't just a weapon. It was a language she spoke fluently when words failed. Her father had once told her, "Respect isn't given. You carve it into the world one shot at a time." She'd never forgotten that. Tess chambered 5 rounds, ran a quick check, and stepped back toward the firing line. The men had finished setting the targets. Steel plates gleaming faintly downrange through the mist, 600 meters, 800 and 1,000. The rain had lightened to a drizzle. Wind gusts were shifting left to right at 12 knots. She could feel it against her cheek. She went prone, tucked the rifle tight to her shoulder, and found the 1,000-meter silhouette through the scope. It was barely visible through the haze, but she could see the outline, small and stubborn. Behind her, she could sense them watching. Mason, Nolan, Tyler, the youngest one who hadn't said much just looked uneasy. Tess breathed out, slow and steady, adjusted one click up, 2 right, waited for the wind to settle, then pressed the trigger. The sound cracked through the air. 1 second later, a faint metallic ping echoed back through the rain. She worked the bolt, chambered the next round, fired again. Then again. 5 shots, 5 hits, all center mass. 90 seconds. When she stood, the men said nothing. Looked like he'd swallowed something sharp. Mason was stone-faced. Nolan stared at the target, then back at her. Tyler broke the silence. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" Tess met his eyes. "Montana, then Fort Trenton, then downrange." Then she slung the rifle over her shoulder and added, "If you want to pass this qualification, stop talking and start learning." That was when her radio crackled to life. The voice on the other end was calm, clipped, unmistakable. "Staff Sergeant Ryland, this is Captain Devlin Carroway, SEAL Team 3. Are you still on the Fort Trenton Range complex?" Tess froze for a second, recognizing the name immediately. She hadn't heard his voice in 2 years, not since Arden Valley. "Affirmative, sir," she replied. "Good," he said. "I've got a problem, need your help." The rain suddenly felt quieter. Carroway explained that 20 miles north, a live-fire training scenario was unfolding. Their primary sniper had been injured during insertion. The mission clock was ticking, 90 minutes to start. He needed someone who could shoot at extended range under pressure and not lose composure when things got messy. "I've been monitoring the range net," he added. Heard some chatter, recognized your voice, figured you might still have your edge. There was a pause. Rain drummed against her cap. Tess answered simply, "Send me coordinates." She ended the call, packed her rifle, and started walking toward the truck. Mason called after her, "Wait, what the hell was that?" She didn't answer, she just said, "Qualification postponed. You'll reschedule through range control." They stood there, dumbfounded, as she drove away, her truck throwing mud across the lot. Later that day, Tyler would look her up. He'd find her service record, her deployments, the commendation for that night in Sangra province. He show the others. And in the silence that followed, something would shift. But Tess didn't think about that as she drove. The windshield wipers beat a slow rhythm against the storm. Her hand stayed steady on the wheel. The SEAL team's coordinates blinked on her GPS, an isolated training site, restricted access. She didn't feel anger. She didn't feel pride either. Just focus. The quiet kind that comes when you stop caring what anyone thinks and remember why you started in the first place. The rain followed her north. And if anyone had asked what she was thinking right then, she would have said this: "I'm done waiting for permission to be who I already am." Sometimes strength doesn't shout. It stands in the rain and waits for the noise to stop. What makes someone answer a call they didn't have to take? The road north was slick with rain and silence. Tess Ryland drove without music, without thought, the rhythm of the wipers steady against the windshield. The coordinates Captain Carroway sent blinked in the GPS, an unmarked road winding deep into the pine forest. She recognized the region from years ago. Restricted ground, training range for Tier 1 units. A place you didn't go unless invited. The gate was half hidden by fog. A security officer stepped from the booth, his poncho rippling in the wind. Tess showed her ID, the paper orders Carroway had transmitted en route. He glanced at the signature line, then back at her, curiosity flickering across his face. Few outside JSOC were summoned there, fewer still who weren't SEALs themselves. The barrier lifted. Tess eased through, tires crunching gravel. Ahead, floodlights burned faintly through mist, illuminating the outline of a forward operations compound built from shipping containers and portable structures. It looked temporary, but everything about it was precise. No wasted motion, no casual air. She parked near the operations tent, stepped out into the downpour and slung her rifle case over her shoulder. The rain felt different now, less hostile, more like the world washing itself clean. Inside, warmth hit her instantly. Computers hummed. Maps glowed across digital screens. Radios crackled with quiet bursts of coded chatter. A man turned from the central console. Square build, close-cropped hair, eyes that carried both calculation and calm. "Ryland," he said, voice low but certain. "Didn't think I'd see you again." "Neither did I, sir," Tess replied. Captain Devlin Carroway crossed the room and extended his hand. "You saved our op in Arden Valley. I didn't forget that." She shook his hand, firm, professional. "You said your primary sniper, out. Fractured wrist during insertion rehearsal. Bad luck." He gestured toward the screen. "We're running a live-fire exercise, classified structure. Hostage rescue scenario, real-time decision-making. One ridge overwatch position, 900 meters to target. You'll engage marked hostiles in support of the assault team. No blanks. Real rounds, controlled conditions. You miss, we start over." Tess studied the map, tracing contour lines with her eyes. The compound sat in a low basin, surrounded by scrub and narrow elevation. The overwatch point was a narrow ridge, windswept, exposed, difficult. "I'll need range data, elevation profile and target silhouettes," she said quietly. Carroway's lips lifted slightly. "Still straight to business. Good, data in your packet, you've got 40 minutes. She nodded, understood. As she turned to leave, Carroway's voice softened. "You all right, Ryland? You sound different." Tess hesitated at the flap. "I'm fine, sir, just another day." But it wasn't, and both of them knew it. Outside, rain slanted sideways across the ridge as Tess climbed. The mud sucked at her boots. She moved with slow precision, one step at a time, keeping her rifle case close. The forest fell quiet behind her, the compound lights dimming with distance until only the wind and her breath filled the air. When she reached the ridge line, she set up beneath a low stretch of shale. Wind speed 8 knots. Gusting, temperature dropping, visibility variable. She took it all in without writing anything down. Her mind had done this for years, the numbers lived inside her. She laid her mat, assembled her rifle, and checked every detail. Scope clarity, bolt movement, suppressor alignment. No room for hesitation. The headset crackled, Carroway's voice calm, precise. "Ryland, this is command. Confirm Overwatch in position." "Overwatch up," she replied. "Good copy. Assault team prepping for insertion. Countdown 50 minutes to scenario start. Your engagement zones are color-coded, red, amber, green. You'll receive target indicators by laser pulse. Confirm on my mark." "Copy all." Wind hit her cheek again, sharper now, the kind of cold that seeps through layers and finds the bone. She shifted slightly, aligning her scope with the compound below. From here it looked like a toy village. Containers stacked to simulate buildings. Vehicles parked for cover. Somewhere down there, a dozen Navy SEALs were gearing up, checking optics, loading mags, joking quietly like they always did before the storm. She envied that ease, that shared rhythm. Because for her, solitude was the default. The only person who'd ever really understood it had been her father. He used to tell her that shooting wasn't about seeing, it was about waiting. "The world moves," he'd say. "Wind changes, but patience doesn't flinch." She whispered that to herself now, barely audible over the wind. The scenario began at dusk. "Command to all stations, exercise live, proceed." Through the scope, Tess watched the SEAL team fan out, moving with eerie synchronization. Laser pulses blinked across her field of view, marking targets. She breathed out and began firing. Crack. 500 meters, hit. Crack. 680, hit. Wind shifted, adjust. Crack. 810, center mass. Each shot echoed softly in the ridge's hollow, the suppressor turning thunder into whisper. Her world shrank to numbers, angles, breath. She didn't think, she didn't feel. She became the math. Below, the assault team moved seamlessly through the mock structures, clearing corners, calling positions. Her rifle covered them like a shadow that never slept. When the final signal came, all targets neutralized. She exhaled for the first time in what felt like an hour, her pulse barely above resting. "Command to Overwatch," Carroway said. "Perfect. No resets. First team to clear in under time." He paused, then softer. "Damn fine work, Staff Sergeant." Tess smiled faintly, unseen in the dark. "Just doing my job, sir." But something in his tone, genuine respect, cut deeper than she expected. After the exercise, she descended from the ridge, mud caking her knees. The compound buzzed with energy again, men unloading mags, laughing, shaking rain off their vests. A few nodded as she passed, quiet but approving. In their world, acknowledgement didn't need words. Carroway met her halfway down the line, clipboard under one arm. "I don't usually say this," he began, "but that was flawless. My team doesn't hand out compliments easy. You earned it." Tess shrugged lightly. "That's what training's for." "Yeah," he said, studying her. "But it's not just that. You handled wind shifts, variable lighting, target delay, all without correction from command. You still read the battlefield like it's your second language." "It's what I do," she said simply. Carroway nodded. "You ever think about cross-training? My unit's always got space for shooters who can stay calm when everyone else loses it." She gave a small, almost tired smile. "Appreciate it, sir, but I've got cadets waiting for their quals tomorrow." He tilted his head. "You sure that's not the kind of offer that comes twice?" Tess looked past him toward the compound. The seals were laughing together, slapping each other's shoulders, a kind of easy belonging, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Then she looked down at her hands, calloused steady. "Yeah," she said quietly, "I'm sure." Later, inside the mess tent, she poured herself a cup of bad coffee. The steam curled upward, catching the dim yellow light. Carroway walked in again, a softer look in his eyes now. "You know," he said, sitting across from her, "I heard everything that happened on that range earlier." Tess froze halfway through her sip. "Their chatter was bleeding through the open net," he continued. "I heard them mocking you. Then I heard you shut them up, and I figured I've still got one mission to run tonight." Tess stared into the cup. The reflection of the light wavered on the surface. "I didn't plan to embarrass them," she said. "I just wanted them to listen." "Sometimes that's all it takes," Carroway said quietly. "One shot and people see you differently." He leaned back. "You ever wonder why it's always the ones who earn it that have to prove it twice?" Tess smiled faintly. "Because the others wouldn't last the first time." For a moment neither spoke. The rain outside softened, tapping lightly on the canvas above. Then Carroway stood. "You did good work tonight, Ryland. I meant what I said. If you ever change your mind, call me directly." He left her alone in the tent, the echo of his boots fading into the night. She sat there long after, listening to the rain. The adrenaline had faded, leaving only quiet fatigue. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled across the horizon. For the first time in years, she felt still. Not vindicated, not triumphant, just seen. And that was enough. When she finally stood to leave, she looked once more at the dark outside. The floodlights flickered faintly against the wet ground. Tomorrow, she'd drive back to Fort Trenton, back to the range, back to the 4 candidates who'd written her off before she ever pulled a trigger. She didn't know what they'd say, didn't really care. Because in her world, respect wasn't a conversation, it was performance. And tonight, she'd reminded herself what she was capable of. Driving back through the trees, the rain had stopped. Mist clung to the edges of the forest, silver under the moonlight. The air smelled of pine and cold metal. Tess rolled down the window, let the wind wash through the cab. The silence felt different now, not empty, earned. She didn't smile, didn't cry, just drove. Because there was work waiting, and dignity never needed applause. Sometimes you don't fight to prove them wrong. You fight to remember who you are. Why did they all go silent when she walked back in? Morning broke gray and heavy over Fort Trenton. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the air still smelled of wet pine and gun oil. The ground steamed in the early light. Trucks idled near the armory, soldiers moved in formation, the kind of routine rhythm that made the base feel like a machine that never slept. Tess Ryland stepped out of her vehicle with her rifle case in hand. She had barely slept. Her uniform was clean, pressed, boots freshly oiled, but her eyes carried the kind of fatigue that never quite fades. As she crossed the training yard, conversation dropped to a hush. Not because of rank, not because of orders, because news travels fast. Word had spread. Someone from range control had mentioned it. A SEAL captain, a classified exercise, her name on the mission log. And maybe it was rumor, maybe half of it was wrong, but it didn't matter. The silence that followed her now wasn't mockery. It was recognition trying to catch up. She walked past them without slowing. At the far end of the field, under the same metal canopy that had once sheltered their laughter, 4 Ranger candidates waited. Mason Torrin, Ree Halbrook, Nolan Cross, and Tyler Graange. All in uniform, all standing at attention. Tess didn't say a word at first. She just looked at them, one by one. The same faces, but something had shifted behind the eyes. Mason's jaw was tight, his usual arrogance gone. Ree looked uneasy, his hands fidgeting near his rifle strap. Nolan's posture was perfect, but there was guilt beneath it. And Tyler, quiet, young Tyler, looked her straight in the eye, not defiant, not fearful, just ready. "Range is yours, Staff Sergeant," Mason said finally, voice steady but low. Tess nodded once. "Targets are up." "Yes, ma'am. 6, 8, and 1,000 meters." "Then let's not waste daylight." They moved automatically, setting up positions, checking gear. No laughter this time. No whispers. Just the rhythm of soldiers doing what they were trained to do. Tess laid her kit on the bench, assembled her M2010 with the same calm precision as before. Every click, every metallic sound was deliberate. The range officer at the far booth watched quietly, clipboard in hand. When she finally spoke, her tone was even professional. "You'll each fire 3 iterations, 600, 800, 1,000. Time limit, 5 minutes per run. Cold bore on the last. Winds moving west-northwest, gusting 10 knots. Read your flags, trust your calls. You pass or fail based on consistency, not luck." The candidates nodded. "Specialist Halbrook," she said without looking up, "you're first." Reed dropped prone, adjusting his scope. His breathing was too fast. She could see it even from behind. The first round cracked wide, low right. "Winds shifted," she said quietly. "You're reading off the flags, not the mirage. Adjust 2 clicks left." He did. The next shot rang steel. Better again. By the end of the sequence, his grouping tightened, still imperfect but disciplined. She saw it, the effort to listen. That alone was progress. Mason went next. He was good technically, but his pride got in the way. He rushed his third shot, jerked the trigger, missed the plate entirely. "Slow down," Tess said. "This isn't about proving you're fast, it's about proving you can think." He nodded silently and rechambered. His final round landed clean. Nolan Cross followed. His first 2 were flawless, third nearly perfect. His control impressed even her. When he cleared his chamber and stood, he faced her fully. "Thank you for coming back, Staff Sergeant," he said quietly. "We didn't deserve it." Tess studied him for a moment. "You didn't have to deserve it," she said. "You just had to be ready to learn." Tyler was last, the youngest, the quietest. He lay down behind his rifle, movement smooth, calm, no bravado, just focus. His first shot hit, then his second, then his third dead center. He lifted his head slightly. "Wind still shifting, ma'am. I compensated mid-draw." Tess allowed a faint smile. "Good, always trust your read." When he stood, the range officer called out results. Tyler Graange, expert marksman. The others, qualified, all passed. They gathered near the bench as she signed off the paperwork. Mason cleared his throat. "Staff Sergeant Ryland," he said, "I owe you an apology. We all do." Ree nodded, awkward. "We acted like idiots." Tess capped her pen, looked at them evenly. "You acted like soldiers who hadn't been tested yet. Now you have." Nolan stepped forward slightly. "We heard what you did, the SEALs, the exercise. Carroway put you in Overwatch, that's." He stopped himself. Words failed. Tess finished for him. "It was a job, same as this. You focus, you deliver, you go home." "But it meant something," Tyler said softly. "To them, to us." Her eyes softened. "Maybe, but the point isn't the shot you take, it's the ones you don't. The patience in between, that's where you find who you really are." The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was thoughtful, the kind that means people are really hearing you. She turned toward the range again, scanning the distance, the shimmer of heat beginning to rise off the clay. "Remember this," she said quietly. "You can't demand respect. You can only demonstrate it every day, every round, every decision." She looked back at them, calm but firm. "Now get your brass, clean your stations, and head to chow. You've earned it." They didn't move right away. Instead, they just watched her for a beat longer, like they wanted to say more but didn't know how. Then one by one, they nodded and dispersed. When they were gone, Tess stood alone again, the same way it had started. But this time the silence didn't sting. It felt right. Later that afternoon, she walked the perimeter of the range alone. The world was quiet now, except for cicadas and the distant pop of another training line. She stopped near the edge of the field, looked up at the faint sunlight breaking through the clouds. Her father's voice drifted in memory. The world won't hand you respect, Tess, but if you keep showing up, it'll learn to listen. She smiled faintly. He'd been right. Maybe that was all any of this was about, showing up, even when they left you in the rain. She leaned against the fence post, staring out across the red clay and green pine line, and let the memory of the night before settle in. The ridge, the rain, Carroway's steady voice in her ear. The feeling of complete focus, complete belonging. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed that quiet clarity until it came back. The truth was, she didn't need validation from anyone on this base. But it mattered somehow that those four had learned something, not about her, but about the job, about the kind of grit that doesn't shout. That evening, she found a message waiting in her inbox. From Cap Devlin Carroway. Subject: appreciation. Heard your range team requalified today. Word travels fast. You keep doing what you're doing. World needs more instructors like you, quiet professionals. And if you ever want to work with SEAL Team 3 again, my line's open. You've got a permanent slot if you want it. Tess read it twice, then closed the laptop without replying. She didn't need to, because some offers meant more left unanswered. Night fell over Fort Trenton. The field lamps buzzed faintly in the dark, casting gold halos on the mud. Tess sat on the tailgate of her truck, cleaning her rifle under the floodlight. The motion was automatic: patch, pull, oil, reassemble. Each scrape of metal felt like punctuation to the day. She thought of Tyler's steady breathing behind the scope, of Nolan's quiet apology, of Mason's lowered eyes. She thought of her father's hands guiding hers on the stock of a rifle when she was a child. She thought of all the times she'd stood alone and realized the world wasn't obligated to understand her, but she was obligated to keep showing up anyway. The sound of boots approached behind her. She looked up. It was Nolan holding a range bag. "Ma'am," he said, "forgot to turn in the range data," and he hesitated. "Thank you for coming back, for not writing us off." Tess took the papers, nodded. "You earned your shot, that's all that matters." He shifted his weight. "You think you'll ever take Carroway up on that offer?" She smiled faintly. "Maybe one day, but for now my job here. Teaching people like us." "Exactly." She slid the rifle into its case. "Because one of you will teach the next, that's how this works." Nolan nodded, thoughtful. "Fair enough." As he turned to go, Tess called out softly, "Cross." He paused. "Ma'am." She held his gaze. "Next time you see someone standing alone in the rain, don't laugh. Hand them a poncho." He blinked, then smiled slowly. "Yes, ma'am." He walked off into the darkness, leaving her with the hum of insects and the faint rustle of wind through the pines. Tess watched him disappear, then looked back down at her rifle, tracing a finger along the smooth steel. Sometimes redemption doesn't come with applause. Sometimes it's just the sound of four young soldiers walking away different than they arrived. And in that quiet, Tess Ryland found peace, not because the world had changed, but because she had refused to. Sometimes dignity doesn't shout. It waits, patient, steady, and lets the world catch up. Why did her name show up on an operations roster she hadn't volunteered for? 2 weeks had passed since the range. The days had settled into their usual rhythm: early PT, training rotations, paperwork, the small certainties that made life at Fort Trenton predictable. Tess Ryland preferred it that way. Predictable meant stable. No politics, no proving ground, no audience waiting to see if she'd fail. But predictability never lasts long in the military. That morning, a courier dropped a sealed envelope at her quarters. Her name, typed clean across the front. The header read, Department of the Army, Temporary Joint Assignment Authorization. She broke the seal, scanning the first page. Her stomach tightened. Attachment: Naval Special Warfare Development Group, SEAL Team 3. Location: undisclosed joint counter-hostage operation. Role: Sniper/Overwatch support. Reporting officer: Captain Devlin Carroway. She sat down slowly on the bunk. The paper trembled slightly in her hands. She hadn't requested this. She hadn't even replied to Carroway's email. Still, he'd found a way. The second page held an operational clause. Voluntary participation recommended. Command approval confirmed. It wasn't technically an order, but in her world, some invitations carried the weight of one. She read the final line again. Report within 48 hours for forward staging. Tess folded the letter neatly, tucked it into her duffel, and stared out the small window above her desk. Outside, the wind carried dust across the training yard. The same canopy where she'd once stood alone shimmered in the heat. She exhaled quietly. Guess we're not done yet. The transport flight left at dawn. No names, no patches, just quiet soldiers with the kind of eyes that had seen too much already. Tess sat near the back, her rifle case secured under her feet. The drone of the C-17's engines filled the silence. Across the aisle, one of the SEALs looked up from cleaning his sidearm and gave her a nod, not recognition, just respect. She returned it, no words needed. Carroway had briefed her during the pre-flight. A joint rescue mission, target zone inside a mountainous region near the coast. Intelligence indicated a small compound holding captured U.S. contractors. Time-sensitive, precision required. Her role: long-range overwatch from an elevated ridgeline, supporting SEAL Team 3's assault element. It wasn't training this time, it was live. And live meant risk, real risk. When they landed, the humidity hit like a wall. The forward base was little more than a network of tents and makeshift shelters dug into a valley of sand and rock. The air smelled of diesel and sweat. Helicopters beat the distance like slow thunder. Carroway met her near the command tent, gear slung across his shoulder, same calm look as always. "Didn't think you show," he said. "You didn't leave me much choice," Tess replied. He smiled faintly. "I figured you'd rather work than argue." She shrugged. "Depends on the company." "Fair enough." He handed her a mission packet. "We go in at 200. Insertion by MH-47. You'll deploy to Ridge 7, northwest of the compound. We've got confirmed visuals on 6 hostiles, 2 possible captives. We need your overwatch on the northeast wall and approach vector. If we miss anything, we lose them." Tess scanned the terrain map. Elevation steep, no cover on approach. Distance 900 meters, wind exposure high. "Hard shot," she murmured. Carroway nodded. "That's why you're here." The night was still when they lifted off. Inside the helicopter, everything pulsed with low red light. The SEALs sat in silence, focused, faces painted in streaks of black and gray. Tess checked her rifle one last time, the click of the bolt loud in the hum. Carroway leaned over. "You nervous?" She looked up. "Always, that's how you stay alive." He grinned, a flash of white under the dim light. "Good answer." The pilot's voice cut through the comms. 30 seconds out. The wind outside turned chaotic. Blades hammered the air. Dust and grit swept across their faces as the ramp dropped. Carroway gave her a signal, 2 fingers toward the ridge. She nodded and jumped. The ground hit hard, boots sinking into loose rock. The world went dark except for starlight and NVG glow. She crouched, scanning the ridge, then began the climb, slow, deliberate, body moving in rhythm with breath. Every muscle remembered this. Every scar, every cold night downrange, every silent prayer whispered before the first shot. At the top she lay prone, unfolded her bipod and adjusted her scope. Down below, the compound flickered faintly in the green glow of night vision. 2 guards patrolled the outer fence. A third stood near the gate. She keyed her mic. Overwatch set. Visual on 3 exterior hostiles. Copy, Carroway's voice came. Assault team in position, on your mark. Tess steadied her rifle, eyes focused through the scope. Wind cross-direction northwest 10 knots. Elevation dropped 20 meters per 100. Target range 850. She lined up the first silhouette, breathing slow. Mark 1, she whispered. The rifle cracked. The target dropped instantly. Mark 2. Another shot clean. The third spun in confusion before falling. Exterior clear, she said. Copy, team moving. She followed their movement through the scope, 6 shadows flowing like water through the dark, breaching silently through the east wall. No sound, no hesitation. Seconds stretched. A burst of gunfire flared from inside, quick and sharp. Voices shouted, then silence again. Tess scanned the windows. A movement caught her eye, a shape near the rear exit, raising a weapon toward the advancing team. Contact rear door, 1 hostile 870 meters, she called. Take it, Carroway ordered. She adjusted, compensated for wind, and fired. The man collapsed mid-motion, rifle clattering against the dirt. Good shot, Carroway said quietly. She almost smiled, almost. The mission lasted 9 minutes. 9 minutes of chaos contained by discipline. When the all-clear came through, package secure, no friendly casualties, Tess finally let her lungs empty. She kept her scope trained until the last man cleared the zone, then slung her rifle and started the descent. The adrenaline faded slow, replaced by that familiar quiet hum in her chest. She found them near the extraction point, crouched beside the evac chopper. 2 civilians, pale and shaken, sat under blankets. Carroway stood nearby, speaking with a medic. When he saw her, he lifted a hand. Ryland, he called, over here. She crossed the sand, boots crunching underfoot. He met her with a grin. Couldn't have gone smoother. Those shots saved us a whole lot of trouble. Just doing my job, she said. Yeah, but you do it better than most. For a second, they just stood there in the whipping rotor wash. The noise was deafening, but in that storm of dust and light, a strange calm settled between them. Respect simple, wordless mutual. Later, back at base, the mood was lighter. Someone had brewed terrible coffee. The SEALs sat around a metal table, laughing in that exhausted, relieved way soldiers do when they've survived something together. Tess lingered near the doorway, unsure whether to join. Carroway saw her, waved her over. Sit down, Ryland. You've earned a cup. She did. The coffee was bitter and burnt, but she didn't care. Hell of a shot tonight, one of the men said. Never saw anyone drop a target mid-breach like that. Just lucky, she said. No such thing, another replied. Luck doesn't group that tight. They laughed softly, nodded her with her, and that difference mattered. It wasn't about gender or reputation anymore. It was about performance, about trust forged in the noise. For the first time in a long while, Tess felt part of something again. After the debrief, Carroway walked her out to the edge of the camp. The sky was beginning to pale, first light creeping over the horizon. Ryland, he said, hands tucked behind his vest, you ever think maybe you were meant to be here? Not just teaching back home, but actually doing this? She thought about it, the quiet of Montana fields, the precision of the range, the noise of the last 9 minutes. I used to think belonging meant staying somewhere, she said. Now I think it's just doing what you're built for, wherever that takes you. He nodded slowly. That's one way to put it. They stood in silence for a while, watching dawn bleed into the sky. Then Carroway said softly, You know, when I first called you that day, I didn't expect you'd pick up. Neither did I. But you did, he said, and because of that, 2 people are alive right now. She met his eyes, We all did our part. He smiled faintly. You really believe that? She looked out across the sand, the sun rising gold over the ridges. Yeah, I do. Because if you start believing you're the only reason things work out, you stop being a soldier. You start being a myth, and myths don't save anyone. Carroway studied her for a moment, then nodded. You ever consider command school? She laughed softly. Command doesn't fit me, I prefer the dirt. I figured you'd say that, he said, but you'd make a damn good leader. I already am, she said quietly, just not the kind that gives speeches. That night as the base settled into uneasy sleep, Tess sat alone outside her tent, rifle across her knees. The stars above the desert seemed sharper here, closer somehow, as if watching. She thought of her father again, of the quiet between storms, of the sound of rain on Carolina clay and the laughter that had once cut through it. Funny how far that moment had carried her. She closed her eyes, breathing in the dry air, letting it fill her lungs. Tomorrow they'd redeploy. The mission would debrief into a report, her name buried somewhere in the middle. No headlines, no medals, just another quiet victory no one would ever hear about. And that was enough. Because what mattered wasn't that they'd left her in the rain. It was that she'd kept walking. Sometimes strength doesn't rise in anger. It rises in silence, steady as a heartbeat, until the world finally turns to look. What happens when doing your job means living with the sound of it afterward. The flight back from the coastal ridge was quiet. The hum of the MH-47's engines filled the cabin like white noise, steady, endless. Tess Ryland sat strapped into her seat, helmet in her lap, eyes unfocused. The SEALs dozed around her, heads bowed, faces smeared with exhaustion. She should have felt relief. 2 civilians rescued, 0 friendly casualties, perfect execution. But somewhere deep inside, something didn't sit right. Her shot, that last one, the hostile by the rear door. She could still see it, frozen in her scope, a shape lifting its weapon toward her team. She had fired on instinct, no hesitation. The man had dropped, dust rising around him like smoke. Later, when she descended, she'd seen him up close, barely older than 20. His weapon had jammed. She didn't mention it in the report. There was no error, no violation of rules of engagement. He'd been armed, hostile, a valid target. Still, that image stayed, the eyes open, unseeing, the rifle jammed mid-feed. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was something quieter, a kind of question that had no answer. She'd been trained to act, not to wonder, but sometimes wondering came after. By the time they reached base, the sun had climbed high, bleaching the desert in pale gold. The after-action brief was short. Carroway handled most of it, efficient, professional, minimal emotion. The mission was logged as successful. 0 friendly casualties, objective secured. When it was done, he dismissed the team to rest. Tess lingered near the edge of the tent, helmet still under her arm. Carroway noticed. Something on your mind? He asked. She hesitated. That last target, north wall, rear exit. He studied her face for a long second. You made the right call. He had a weapon. You saw the angle. I know. Her voice was low, still. Carroway exhaled slowly. We don't get to choose clean outcomes, Ryland, only correct ones. She nodded but said nothing more. He gave her a small nod as if to say I get it, then walked off toward the comms tent. Tess stood alone in the heat, watching dust swirl in lazy spirals. Somewhere far off, a helicopter lifted, blades flashing in the sunlight. The world kept moving as if nothing had changed. But something inside her had. That evening, the base quieted. Most of the team slept. A few played cards under the dim yellow bulbs strung across the mess area. Tess sat alone near the perimeter wall, rifle propped beside her, staring out at the endless sand. The desert at night was different from the rain back home, silent in a way that made you feel both small and infinite. She thought of her father again. When she was 13, she'd shot her first coyote. It had been stalking the herd for days. Her father had made her take the shot herself. When the animal dropped, she'd felt proud until she walked up to it. It wasn't just a threat anymore. It was a living thing, broken because she'd chosen to stop it. Her father had said nothing, just rested a hand on her shoulder. "Now you understand," he'd said. She hadn't, not fully until now. Because out here it wasn't coyotes. It was people young, scared, sometimes desperate. People who made choices that collided with hers. And sometimes, even when you were right, it didn't feel like winning. A soft crunch of boots approached from behind. Tess turned slightly. Carroway, no helmet, no vest, just a mug of coffee in one hand. "You look like you're trying to solve world peace out here," he said quietly. "Just thinking," she replied. He handed her the mug. "Then think with caffeine, works for me." She accepted it, the steam curling between them. "Can't sleep." He shook his head. "Never could after missions. Mind keeps replaying things, even the good ones." Tess nodded. "Yeah, I get that." They stood there in silence for a while, staring at the horizon where the dunes met the stars. Carroway spoke again, softer this time. "You know, Ryland, I've had shooters come and go. Some brilliant, some reckless. You're different." "How so?" "You don't chase the moment, you survive it." He paused. "But I also think you carry it too long." She looked down at the sand. "Maybe that's what keeps me steady." "Or what keeps you from sleeping," he said. She smiled faintly. "You sound like my father." "Smart man, then." He was. Her voice grew quieter. "Taught me everything, mostly how not to flinch." Carroway studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Well, it worked." She didn't answer. The silence between them was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that existed between people who understood the same ghosts. The next morning, new orders came down. The mission's success had opened follow-on operations. The region wasn't stable. Intelligence flagged new threats within a 50-mile radius. Carroway's team was tasked with site reconnaissance and potential re-engagement if hostile movement reappeared. Tess was asked to remain attached, at the commander's discretion. Carroway didn't hesitate. "We keep her," he told the briefing officer. "She's part of the team." She didn't argue. They moved out again that night, convoying through narrow desert trails under blackout conditions. Dust rose in slow spirals behind each vehicle. At the halfway point, their lead Humvee hit a buried pressure mine. The explosion tore the quiet in half, a thunderclap of sand and fire. The convoy halted instantly. Carroway's voice snapped over comms. "All units halt, medical forward, defensive perimeter." Tess was out of her seat before the echoes faded, rifle in hand, heart hammering. The smoke stung her eyes. One man down, another limping. They dragged the wounded clear, medics working fast. Carroway crouched beside them, barking coordinates into his radio. "Ryland Ridge to the west. Check for follow-on fire." "On it," she shouted. She sprinted toward the slope, lungs burning, dirt slipping beneath her boots. Dropping to prone, she scanned through her scope. Nothing but haze and heat shimmer. Then movement, a glint faint, maybe a lens. "Contact West Ridge," she called. "Possible spotter." "Can you take it?" Carroway asked. She tracked the glint. Negative ID, too far for confirmation. "Hold your shot," he said. "We don't need a mistake right now." "Copy." She exhaled slowly, forcing her heart rate down. Her finger hovered near the trigger. Wind gusted. The glint vanished. Minutes passed, then nothing. No fire, no motion. Carroway's voice came again. "All clear, remount, we're pulling back." Tess rolled onto her back, staring at the empty sky. The adrenaline ebbed, leaving a hollow ache in its place. She hadn't fired. She'd done exactly what protocol demanded, but the restraint felt heavier than any trigger pull. Back at camp, the medics stabilized the wounded. No fatalities, but the faces told the story, the exhaustion, the quiet calculation of near-miss statistics. Tess cleaned her rifle in silence. The faint smell of oil filled the tent. Her hands moved on muscle memory alone. Carroway entered quietly, standing across from her. "Good call today." She looked up. "I didn't shoot." "Exactly, you didn't have to." She hesitated. "You think I should've?" He shook his head. "You waited, you made sure. That's leadership, Ryland, not the shot you take, but the one you don't." For a long moment she said nothing. Then finally, "Feels the same either way." He gave a tired smile. "Yeah, that's the price." Later she sat outside again, the rifle cleaned and stowed. The base was silent except for the low hum of generators. She took off her cap, ran a hand through her hair, and looked at her reflection in a small mirror fixed to her gear case. Her face looked older than it had weeks ago, not in years, in weight. She thought of those 4 young rangers back at Fort Trenton, thought of the laughter, the rain, the silence that had followed. They had seen her strength, but they hadn't seen this, the quiet toll of it, the cost that doesn't show up on commendations. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the horizon, echoing off the dunes. It sounded like rain. She closed her eyes, imagining Carolina clay again, red earth, soaked and shining. The smell of wet steel, the feel of cold wind on her face. That memory didn't hurt anymore. It steadied her. Because maybe that's what all of this was for, to teach her that strength wasn't about the perfect shot. It was about walking away afterward steady, no matter how heavy it felt. Carroway found her still sitting there when dawn came. "Can't sleep again?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "You too." He sat beside her on the low wall. "We keep making it back, that's what counts." "Yeah," she said quietly, "but sometimes that's not the hardest part." He looked at her. "Then what is?" "Living with the sound of it," she said. For a long time neither spoke. The sun climbed higher, turning the sand from gray to gold. Finally Carroway stood. "When this deployment's over, you should teach again. People need instructors who understand this part, the silence after." She nodded. "Maybe." He started to walk away, then paused. "Ryland." "Yeah." He smiled faintly. "Next time someone tells you to wait in the rain, tell them the seals are already calling." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "Copy that, Captain." He disappeared into the rising light, and Tess sat there a little longer, watching the desert shift colors with the day. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought in the field. They're fought in the quiet that follows when the world is safe again, but your mind is still there. What happens when the war finally stops, but your mind does? 3 months later, Tess Ryland stepped off the transport at Dover. The air smelled different here, cooler, clean, alive with the hum of distant cars and the faint salt from the Atlantic. The runway stretched long and empty behind her, gray under the overcast sky. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt unanchored. No gunfire, no orders, just the quiet rhythm of a world that hadn't noticed she'd been gone. A logistics officer greeted her with a clipboard and a polite, almost indifferent nod. "Welcome home, Staff Sergeant. You're listed for 30 days of decompression leave before reassignment. Transportation to Fort Trenton departs at 1300 hours." She nodded. "Copy." He moved on, his voice fatting among the others. Tess stood alone on the tarmac, duffel at her feet, rifle case strapped to her shoulder. She'd seen men break down crying at this moment. Others laugh too loud. Some stare blankly, unable to move. Tess just breathed deep and slow. She survived again. That was supposed to mean something. But the world looked the same, and she didn't. The flight to Carolina was short. The kind of flight where the silence between passengers feels heavier than turbulence ever could. Tess sat by the window, watching clouds drift below like soft mountains. Every time she blinked, flashes of the desert returned. The flare of muzzle light, the feel of recoil, the man whose rifle had jammed. Her mind kept replaying seconds she couldn't change. When she landed at Fort Trenton, the rain had returned. It wasn't violent this time, just steady, soft, almost familiar. She smiled faintly at the irony. Of course it would rain. She checked into her quarters, same building, same hallway, same cot, but nothing felt the same. Her gear looked alien in the corner, as if it belonged to someone else. The base was quieter now, the cadence of training drills fading in the distance. A new batch of ranger candidates were rotating through. She could hear them yelling on the far range, their voices sharp and young. It was strange to realize how much she'd aged, not in years but in weight. 2 days passed before anyone knocked on her door. When she opened it, a familiar face stood there, Captain Devlin Carroway in civilian clothes. "Permission to come in?" he asked. Tess blinked. "What are you doing here?" "Paperwork," he said with a small grin, "and maybe checking up on a sniper who doesn't answer her phone." She stepped aside. "You could have just emailed." "I did," he said, sitting on the edge of her desk. "You didn't reply." Tess folded her arms. "Maybe I didn't have much to say." "Fair," he admitted. "Still figured I'd stop by, heard you were back on base." She shrugged, "For now." He studied her for a moment. "You look tired." "I'm fine." "Sure you are." The words weren't teasing. They were gentle, like someone testing the strength of cracked glass. After a pause, Carroway said quietly, "You ever talk about it, the job, what it costs?" Tess looked at him, eyes steady. "No, talking doesn't change it." "Maybe not," he said, "but it helps you carry it without letting it rot inside." She turned away, looking out the window. The rain streaked the glass like veins of silver. "When you're out there," she said softly, "the world makes sense. There's clarity, you know who you are, you know what's right, but when you come home—" She trailed off. Carroway finished for her. "Everything gets quiet." "Yeah." He nodded slowly. "You're not alone in that, Ryland. None of us come back clean." She didn't answer. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was shared understanding, heavy but human. He finally stood, adjusting his jacket. "Listen, my team's rotating out for 6 months. After that, I'll be back stateside. If you ever want to teach again or join another joint op, you've got options. You've earned them." "Thanks," she said. "I'll think about it." He smiled faintly. "That's all I wanted to hear." He reached the door, hesitated, then added, "By the way, the SEALs still talk about you. You've got a reputation now. The woman in the rain." Tess almost laughed. "Figures." "Stay steady, Ryland." "You too, Captain." He left. The door closed softly behind him. That night she couldn't sleep. The rain beat gently on the roof, steady and rhythmic. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thoughts circling like ghosts. Around midnight she got up, pulled on her jacket and walked out toward the range. The night air was cool, the earth dark and glistening. Floodlights cast long shadows across the field. The target stood silent, slick with rain. She stopped at the firing line, breathing in the smell of wet metal and clay. She hadn't shot a round since coming home. Now she opened her case, assembled her rifle, and lay prone in the mud. The stock felt familiar against her shoulder, the kind of familiarity that lives somewhere deeper than memory. Through the scope, the world came back into focus, clean, simple, measurable. Wind drifted east. Flags bent slightly. Distance, 600 meters. She adjusted for drop, controlled her breathing, and squeezed the trigger. The crack split the night. Steel rang. The echo rolled through the hills and faded. She chambered another round, fired again, then again. Each shot steadier, quieter, more deliberate. By the fifth, she stopped. Her hands trembled slightly, not from nerves, from something else. Relief, maybe. Or grief. She wasn't sure anymore where one ended and the other began. The next morning, she found a note slipped under her door. No signature, just a single line written in clean block letters. Keep shooting, not because you have to, because you still can. She smiled faintly. She knew who had written it. And maybe he was right. Because that morning she drove to the training office, requested reassignment. Not to field ops, not to combat, but to instruction. Sniper School, Fort Trenton, she told the clerk. The man raised a brow. Thought you'd had your fill of this place, Sergeant. She shrugged. Guess I like the rain. He chuckled, stamping the paperwork. Good to have you back. Weeks passed. Life on base found rhythm again. The new candidates arrived. Young, loud, uncertain. The kind of soldiers who thought they understood war but hadn't yet met it face to face. Tess stood before them during their first range briefing, hands clasped behind her back, the same posture she'd held years before when 4 men had laughed in the rain. But now her voice carried differently, not louder, not sharper, steadier. You're here to learn more than how to shoot, she told them. You're here to learn how to think. Patience wins battles long before bullets do. The moment you pull the trigger, you've already made the hardest choice you'll ever face. The recruits listened. No one laughed. And maybe that was because she carried a kind of gravity now, the kind forged in silence and sand, not ceremony. After the briefing, one of the younger cadets approached her. A woman this time, barely 20, nervous but eager. Ma'am, she said softly, is it true you served with SEAL Team 3? Tess nodded once. I did. The cadet hesitated. What's it like being out there? Tess paused, choosing her words carefully. It's quiet, she said finally, and loud at the same time. You learn who you are by what you do when no one's watching, and sometimes by what you do when they all are. The cadet nodded, eyes wide, the kind of awe only youth can carry. I hope I can be that strong someday. Tess smiled gently. You already are, you just haven't had to prove it yet. That evening she walked the range alone again. The sun was setting, bleeding orange into gray. She could still smell the oil and the clay, still hear the faint ring of steel targets far downrange. She sat on the bench, closing her eyes for a long moment. The past months unspooled quietly in her head. The rain, the laughter, the ridge, the desert. The shot that didn't need to be taken, the ones that did. Each moment different, each one the same. Because they all taught her one truth. Strength isn't about control, it's about balance. She'd spent years proving she could endure anything, but endurance wasn't the point. Understanding was. She opened her eyes, watching the last of the light fade beyond the pines. Somewhere behind her, the base loudspeakers played the evening bugle call, soft, solemn, timeless. And in that moment, Tess Ryland felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the kind that erases the past, but the kind that makes it livable. Later that night, as she packed up, she saw a young cadet standing at the line, drenched from the drizzle. The girl's rifle jammed mid-cycle. She looked flustered, embarrassed, muttering under her breath. Tess walked over quietly, knelt beside her. Breathe, she said softly. Take your time. The cadet looked up. It's stuck, ma'am. I can't clear it. Tess smiled faintly. Then start again, no rush. The girl did, cleared the bolt, reloaded and fired. The shot rang clean. When she looked back, Tess was already walking away. The cadet called out, thanks. Tess turned, rain dripping from her cap. Don't thank me, she said. Just remember what it felt like when someone waited instead of walking away. The cadet frowned slightly, not understanding yet. But one day she would. Sometimes the strongest people aren't the ones who never break. They're the ones who rebuild quietly in the rain when no one's left watching. Why did her phone buzz at midnight, after she'd finally learned to sleep again? Tess Ryland sat in the small, single-bulb light of her barracks room, the kind of quiet hour when even the base generators hummed softer. Her rifle leaned in the corner, clean and oiled, untouched for days. On the desk lay a mug of cold coffee and a half-written letter she'd never send. When the vibration started, she almost ignored it. Then she saw the name. Carroway. She answered before the second ring. Ryland. Hope you're ready to ruin a good night's rest, he said, voice tight. Her pulse steadied instantly. Talk to me. Hostage recovery. Civilian convoy ambushed 2 hours ago on the border, our unit's closest. Intel shows movement toward the hills. Terrain's rough, minimal satellite visibility. I need an overwatch, someone I trust. You're still deployed. Rotation got extended. We're down a shooter. You're on my list. Tess leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Official. Unofficially, it will be by dawn. You in? She hesitated. The old pull twisted deep inside, the part that never fully left. Yeah, she said quietly. Send coordinates. Carroway exhaled through static. Knew you'd say that. Wheels up in 4 hours. Pack light. The line went dead. She sat there a moment longer, listening to the hum of the lights, then stood and reached for her gear. The peace she'd built these last months was about to end. And somehow she didn't mind. By dawn, the airfield was alive with motion. The smell of jet fuel and rain mixed into the wind like an old memory. Carroway's team waited near the transport, different faces this time, younger, but their eyes held the same readiness. He approached as she climbed aboard, smile quick but tight. Good to see you again, Ryland. You always call me when something's on fire, she said. Because you never miss. She strapped in. Let's make sure that stays true. He briefed her mid-flight. Convoy of NGO personnel attacked outside Arid Valley. Local militia involved, trained, organized, better than the usual chaos. 2 hostages confirmed alive. We insert 10 clicks south, track the route, and intercept before they cross into the mountains. You'll take overwatch on the southern rise. Range about 900 meters, limited visibility. Copy. Command, not sure who they're working with, he added. Signals intercept pick chatter mentioning foreign advisors. Might get messy. Messy's normal, Tess said. Still, Carroway warned, if you see something off pattern, call it before you shoot. Always do. He nodded, trusting her completely. That trust, the kind born through fire and rain, said more than orders ever could. They hit ground before noon. The air was dry and electric, heat waves rising off the sand like ghosts. Tess moved with practiced rhythm. Assemble, confirm, calibrate. Her spotter for the mission, a young petty officer named Graves, watched her work with wide-eyed focus. You really were the one from Fort Trenton? He asked quietly. Depends what they told you. They said you hit 5 for 5 through a storm, while the guys under you were hiding from lightning. Tess smirked. They left out that I got soaked. Graves chuckled nervously. Glad you're on our side. Focus on the job, kid. Yes, ma'am. By dusk, the team moved into position. Tess and Graves crawled into a narrow rock shelf overlooking the valley. The terrain rolled out before them, scrub, dust, and a narrow dirt track winding between low ridges. Through her scope, she saw flickers of movement, vehicles crawling along the track, armed riders on either side. Visual on convoy, she murmured. 3 trucks, 2 escorts. Copy, Carroway replied in her ear. We're moving from the south, 3-minute delay. Wait for my mark. The air felt heavy, wind from the east 5 knots, temperature dropping, mirage low. Tess steadied her breathing, scanning each vehicle. The middle truck carried civilians, hands bound, heads covered. Got them, she said. 2 hostages, both alive. Understood, hold position. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger, pressure absent but ready. The crosshairs followed the lead truck as it slowed near a turn. Something felt wrong. The formation was too disciplined. No panic, no scattered behavior. These weren't just locals. Carroway, she said, they're trained, movements coordinated. Copy, confirm visual on any overwatch. She swept her scope across the ridge opposite. Then she saw it, a shimmer of glass, brief but unmistakable. "Sniper nest, 2 o'clock, 840 meters," she whispered. "You have authority," Carroway said. Tess exhaled, the rifle cracked. The enemy shooter dropped. Then the world erupted. Automatic fire burst from the convoy, tracers stitching the air. "Contact, contact," voices shouted through comms. Carroway's team broke from cover, closing distance fast. Tess adjusted, firing controlled, surgical. Each round bought seconds for the assault to move. Graves relayed range calls beside her, calm under pressure. 650, left flank, 2 targets mark. Crack, crack, both down. Then she saw it, the rear truck revering, kicking dust, trying to flee with the hostages still inside. "Carroway, rear trucks moving, north exit. Can you disable?" "Negative, civilians on board." "Hold, team redirecting." Through the scope, Tess tracked the driver. Young, wild-eyed, steering hard, one arm bleeding. He wasn't shooting, he was running. Then another figure climbed into the bed, rifle raised, aiming straight at the SEALs advancing uphill. Tess adjusted, crosshairs aligned. "Ryland, you're clear," Carroway said. She fired. The man collapsed backward. The truck skidded, slammed sideways into a rock, stalled. Dust swallowed it whole. "Targets down, hostages stable," she said. "Copy that, secure site." Her heart was still steady, but inside a small voice whispered, the one that always came afterward. Another face, another silence. By the time they reached the crash site, the sun was bleeding out behind the hills. Carroway's men pulled the hostages clear, checking vitals, both shaken but alive. Tess stayed back, covering the perimeter. Her hands were steady, her breath calm, but her chest felt hollow. When Carroway approached, helmet off, he didn't smile. He just nodded. "Clean work," he said. "Textbook execution." She looked past him at the wrecked truck. Smoke curled from the hood, ghost-like in the dusk. "Doesn't feel clean," she murmured. "It never does." He glanced at the hostages. One older man, one young woman, both clutching canteens, trembling. "They'll live," he said. "That's what matters." Tess nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's what matters." But that night, as they exfiltrated under starlight, she couldn't shake the sound of the shot. Back at forward base, Carroway found her sitting outside again. Same as before, same silence between them. He sat beside her, set 2 tin cups down. "I don't have whiskey," he said, "but the coffee's strong enough to burn through sadness." She smiled faintly. "I'll take it." They drank in silence, staring at the black horizon. Finally, Carroway said, "You know, there's a reason I keep calling you." She looked over. "Because you're short-staffed." He laughed. "Because you remind me what it's supposed to look like. Discipline, clarity, no ego." "Ego gets people killed," she said. "So does hesitation." She met his gaze. "You ever wonder how long we can keep doing this before we start mistaking endurance for purpose?" He considered that, eyes narrowing. "Yeah, every damn time I look at the after-action reports." "Then why keep going?" He shrugged. "Because someone has to." Tess looked down at her hands. The calluses hadn't faded. The scars on her knuckles still caught the light. "Maybe that's not enough reason anymore," she said quietly. Carroway studied her, then asked softly, "You thinking of stopping?" She took a long breath. "Maybe, or maybe I'm just tired of fighting the same ghosts." He nodded. "Fair, but for what it's worth, those ghosts keep the rest of us alive." She didn't answer. The desert wind filled the space between them. The following morning, the mission debrief wrapped. Command classified it as flawless, but the commendations didn't mean much. Before they boarded the return flight, Carroway pulled Tess aside. "Ryland," he said, "I've seen shooters come home and fall apart because they never learned to stop. Don't be one of them." She smirked lightly. "You really think I'll fall apart?" "I think you already know how not to. That's rarer than anything I've seen." She slung her rifle bag over her shoulder. "We'll see." "Hey," he said, softer. "For what it's worth, the world's better because you keep showing up." Tess met his eyes, the sunlight catching the faint scar above his brow. "Maybe, but one day it has to learn to stand without us." He smiled. "You sound like a teacher again." "Maybe I never stopped." They shook hands, firm, unspoken respect, and boarded separate aircrafts. Hours later, Tess watched the clouds drift beneath her again. Same view as always, different meaning. For the first time, she didn't feel the old pull of battle, the craving for clarity. She felt something else instead. Closure. Not because everything was right, but because she finally understood that right was never guaranteed. It was something you chose every day, one steady decision at a time. She closed her eyes, letting the hum of the engines drown out memory. Outside, the sky burned pale gold. Somewhere below, Fort Trenton waited, rain-washed, quiet, unchanged. And somewhere even deeper, her father's voice whispered again, softer now, not command but peace. "You've done enough, kid. It's okay to rest." She smiled faintly. Maybe this time she would. Sometimes the bravest thing a soldier can do isn't to fight another battle. It's to finally come home and stay there. Why did the rain always seem to find her, no matter where she went? It had been 6 months since the last mission, the one Carroway called her final rotation, the one she never talked about afterward. Fort Trenton looked the same, but time had shifted everything else. The recruits were younger, the base louder, the world somehow faster. Tess Ryland walked the familiar path toward the long-range field, the morning mist curling over the Carolina clay. The air smelled like it always had, oil, brass, and wet earth. Only now it didn't smell like battle, it smelled like memory. She carried no rifle today, just a notebook and a thermos of coffee. Old habits die hard. At the firing line, a small group of cadets waited, rifles slung, boots clean. Among them stood the young woman from months ago, the one who'd struggled with a jam in the rain. She straightened when Tess approached. "Morning, Staff Sergeant." "Morning," Tess replied. The cadet hesitated. "They said you used to be, deployed, that you worked with SEALs." Tess smiled faintly. "I used to do a lot of things." "What was it like," the cadet asked, "being out there?" Tess looked past her downrange. The mist thinned, revealing the outlines of distant targets, the same silhouettes she'd watched through scopes half her life. "It's a place where you learn the truth," she said quietly. "About yourself, about fear, about patience." "Patience?" Tess nodded. "Anyone can pull a trigger, but not everyone can wait for the right moment. The difference between good and great is silence. You learn to live inside it." The girl nodded, eyes wide, absorbing every word. Tess continued, her tone soft, deliberate. "When I was your age, someone once told me to wait in the rain while they stayed dry. I did. And that's how I learned what waiting can do. It can build you or it can break you. It depends on what you decide to carry." The cadet said nothing, just listened, the way Tess once had. The rest of the morning passed in routine. Shots cracked, echoing through mist and pine. Cadets called wind, adjusted scopes, logged results. Tess observed, calm, silent, occasionally offering a correction or a nod of approval. When the range went cold, she walked the line alone, picking up brass. Her hands moved slow, careful, as if each casing held a story. By noon, clouds thickened. Rain again, soft at first, then steady, drumming on her shoulders, blurring the edges of everything. She didn't move. She let it fall. For the first time, it didn't feel like isolation. It felt like peace. That afternoon, she returned to the small office tucked beside the instructor's barracks. On the wall hung a single framed photo, a group of SEALs from years ago, standing under the desert sun. Carroway was there, grinning, arm around a younger version of herself. Someone had scribbled across the bottom in Sharpie, "The one who waited." She smiled faintly, running her fingers along the frame. Her computer chimed, a new email. From Devlin Carroway. Subject check-in. Ryland. We're done out here, officially this time. My team's rotating home. Heard your trainees are breaking range records, figures. I'm headed stateside next month, teaching leadership courses at Coronado. They want someone to guest instruct precision ethics. I told them I know just the person. You've got more to teach than any manual could hold. Think about it. See asterisk. Tess stared at the screen, then leaned back slowly, exhaling. The offer was tempting. A new stage, new students, but this place, the mud, the rain, the silence, was home now. She replied simply, "Good luck, Captain, stay steady, T." Then she closed the laptop. That evening, as the rain eased, she drove off base toward the Ridge Road, the one overlooking the long stretch of forest she used to run during early training days. The clouds were breaking, the air glowing faintly gold through the drizzle. She pulled over, stepped out, and leaned against the truck, watching the light fade. This was where it all began. Montana had taught her to shoot. War had taught her to survive. And the rain had taught her to endure. Now the world had gone quiet again, but this time she wasn't waiting for orders. She was listening. Listening to the wind in the trees, the hum of cicadas, the faint roll of thunder somewhere far away. The silence no longer pressed on her, it lifted her. Days turned to weeks, training continued, seasons shifted. Tess became something of a legend on base, not because she talked about her past, but because she didn't. The cadets whispered about her calm, her precision, her patience. They said she could read the wind without flags, sense a misfire before it happened. Some said she'd once led SEALs into a firefight and never flinched. Others said she'd taught the very man who trained them all. She never corrected any of it. Legends, she knew, had their place. But truth lived in quieter corners. She'd found hers here. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped low and the range glowed copper, she noticed a young man lingering after drills. Nervous, uncertain. He approached slowly, saluting. "Ma'am, can I ask something?" "Go ahead." "Do you ever miss it, the fight?" Tess looked at him for a long moment. "Every day," she said honestly, "but missing it isn't the same as wanting it back." He frowned slightly. "How do you tell the difference?" She smiled faintly. "You'll know when peace stops feeling empty." The boy nodded, thoughtful. "Thank you, ma'am." She watched him walk off toward the barracks, his silhouette fading against the twilight. He reminded her of herself, years ago, standing alone at a range in the rain, convinced she had to prove something. Now she finally understood. She never did. That night, lightning flickered in the distance again, far beyond the tree line. The air rumbled softly, a storm building miles away. Tess stood by the window, cup of coffee in hand, watching it. Every storm she'd faced, every laugh, every mission, every moment she'd been told she wasn't enough, had led here, to stillness. She thought of her father, of Carroway, of the 4 soldiers who'd once stood dry under a canopy while she'd waited outside, soaked to the skin. She wondered where they were now, maybe deployed, maybe home, maybe standing in the rain themselves, thinking of that day. Maybe they remembered the woman who didn't walk away. And maybe that was enough. The next morning she found a letter waiting in her mailbox. No return address, just her name handwritten. Inside, a single page. Staff Sergeant Ryland. You don't know me, but my brother was one of the men you trained last year, Private Graange. He told me you changed how he saw things, said you taught him that respect isn't a gift, it's a habit. He came home last month, different man, quieter, stronger, better. Thought you should know someone out here noticed. Graange. Tess read the letter twice. Then she folded it carefully and tucked it into her notebook. Outside, the sky had cleared completely, bright, cloudless, open. She smiled, a small private smile. That evening she stood again on the range, alone. The wind was calm, the targets shimmered in the distance. She set her rifle down, not to shoot, but to look. At the path she'd walked. At the space she'd filled. At the silence she'd finally made peace with. For years she'd thought strength was the sound of the shot, the power in precision, the proof of control. Now she realized it was everything that came before and after. The waiting, the deciding, the walking away. Because the world would always have its storms. But some people, rare ones, learned to stand in them until the clouds broke. The bugle played across the base, long and low, signaling lights out. The sound drifted over the fields, soft and haunting. Tess sat on the bench one last time, watching the horizon fade into blue. Tomorrow the cadets would line up again, new faces, same questions. And she'd be there to answer, not with stories of war but with lessons of quiet resilience. Because maybe her father had been right all along. Respect isn't given, it's carved into the world, one steady shot at a time. She closed her eyes, felt the first drop of rain hit her cheek, and didn't move. No canopy. No laughter. No doubt. Just the woman who'd once been told to wait in the rain. Now standing in it by choice. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It just stands there, unshaken, uninvited. Until the storm passes, and the world finally understands why.